Well, welcome back, everybody. We're in our final session, and I think we had opened up many strands, and no better person to hand it over to Perry to sort of bring them together and recap. We're also very much looking forward to your preview of your upcoming book, Perry. So here we go, the final session of this year's Money View Symposium.
Okay, let me find, this is the one here. Um, okay, so yes, so here I'm going to start by just saying something about the book project, and then I'll talk about some of the sessions that we've gone through. This was for those of you watching this after the fact. You missed a really very stimulating 2 days. So, and you missed the opportunity to engage with these stimulating presentations. So next year, come in person. So here's the book. At the moment, I think last year at the Money View Symposium 4.0, I at the very one of the last sessions, I talked about this thought that I had that my next project would be writing a book. At that time, none of that existed. Okay, so this is a little progress report on it. That over the next couple of months after that, I produced a couple of documents, and then I did a second draft, and then I did a third draft. So there are actual serious drafts of the first three chapters now. Okay, A Web of Promises to Pay and Dynamics of Global Credit were finished over the summer, and so the latest draft is August 22nd. And then the third chapter, The Prices of Money, Interest, and Exchange, I actually did during the semester, which almost killed me. But I had put it on my syllabus, so I had to deliver it by the week in which it was assigned. So there are three chapters, and those three chapters, for those of you who don't know, I also presented them to the workshop that Sasha was mentioning that organized in Berlin in January. So got some good. I did eat one every day, so that it was getting some feedback from that. I have decided, which I don't think I had decided a year ago when I last spoke to you about this, that I should be targeting sort of graduate students in economics. And but having in mind that other people will be interested in this, and so writing it at a level that it could be understood by people who are not graduate students in economics, but that I want to make sure that I am addressing the questions that graduate students in economics will have. So I have, whenever I find a graduate student in economics who has time on their hands, okay, I ask them to give me feedback on these chapters. So this has been informally throughout not just that moment in Berlin in January, but before that too. And that has been a very interesting and helpful experience. I've never written like that before. Mostly my books are written and published without anybody having ever read them. It's just me. Um, so this is a very different kind of book because it's not a narrative structure. It doesn't have a natural. It's much more like the teaching that I do, and I realize that developing the money view I've used my classes, to do this, for 25 years. So that this is just now I'm using my classes to help me write the book, not just to develop the ideas. So these three things exist. The fourth chapter, The Price of Money Price Level, I put Money View Symposium 4.0 because that was a talk that I gave a year ago. And that hasn't been turned into a paper yet, into a chapter yet, because I really felt that it was better to keep moving. And so the talk that I gave just yesterday, which Money View of Macro, is sort of a draft of chapter 5, Managing Money, Prices, and Quantities. And I think now I will go back and try to turn both of those things into papers so that that's the core analytical part of the book. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I may do more things given some of the comments that just today and yesterday. The part 2 of the book, okay, is meant to, this is how I'm conceiving of it right now, is meant to sort of try to create hooks for people who are not graduate students in economics are coming from other social sciences. So political economy of money management, I'm noticing that people are writing books. Koenig's has this book, The Bailout State, which I've just written a review of for Finance and Society. Moshella, I didn't. She has a book. There are a couple of other books that are now out. People who are building on the money view in one way or another. That you were mentioning the reading group. You're reading these books, and so there's Anushka Patia's book. There's a bunch of books like that, and I feel like I should at least uh, point out or hint at where I stand on some of these matters without particularly trying to make a contribution, because I'm not a political scientist, so I don't want to pretend to be, but I want to show the political scientists that I am reading them and thinking about them, and that I have. If you are interested in what a sort of very precise money view lens would make of your work, okay, here it is. Here's what I would say about your work. And so it's an attempt to engage a wider audience. The same is true of chapter 7. These are the economic historians. I gave a talk at Rutgers, actually on the Kindleberger book. They asked me, and I used that opportunity to sort of draft some ideas about the implications of the money view for how you would interpret the last 100 years of economic history. And it's basically a Kindlebergian idea about key currency. And so as opposed to, we invented this thing from whole cloth at Bretton Woods or something like that. So the economic historians, this is in fact a revisionist view. So that's reaching out to the economic historians. It's a similar, and historians in general, as a matter of fact, because the economic historians tend to be more historians than they are economists. And so some of that will also be, I've because now Quinn is my colleague. He's an intellectual historian, but if you read The Globalist, as Oscar said, he had read The Globalist. It's sort of a story of intellectual history in Europe, okay, and it's parallel to the story that I tell in the Kindleberger book, which is about America. Okay, so I am talking to historians on intellectual history, kind of as well. Chapter 8, money view of orthodoxy and heterodoxy. So I gave the keynote for Sasha's workshop, which was a money view of heterodoxy. So that was me engaging with basically the post-Keynesians and also the circuitists, and there's other sort of groups there too. I haven't written money view of orthodoxy yet, but that will be there. So that will be about the Taylor rule and standard stuff. I saw that you were reading in your reading group Bruner and Rees, for example. So I know what I think about them. And there's another one too by Patrick. I've forgotten the name of it. But there's a couple of these books where sort of more mainstream kind of monetary economists are weighing in, and you can see them. This is what I want to signal to you. Maybe you noticed this when you read Runmeier, that they both of these books that I mentioned, one of which I've forgotten the name of, make gestures in the direction of the money views, sort of. One of them says, "Oh well, we sort of just start where Kindleberger leaves off," and they cite manias, panics, and crashes, but they don't really understand what Kindleberger was really saying. That shows to me that some reader, these are university presses, so there was some reviewer who said, "You do all this stuff and you don't even say anything about Kindleberger," and so they put in a little citation there. And the other book, had a little throwaway citation to Minsky. And again, they're citing the wrong thing of Minsky. It's pretty clear that they have not actually read Minsky or understood what Minsky has to say. But I take that as a sign that the publishers are interested in a book like mine, that there may be more acceptance of this than there would have been 10 years ago. That the idea that standard orthodox monetary theory needs help, okay, is getting to be a little more acceptable than it was 10 years ago. Thanks to groups like this. Okay. And then chapter 9 a history of the money view thought, understanding that this is not something invented from whole cloth, that there's always been a kind of money view tradition in economics that comes from, maybe some of it is even outside of economics, central bankers' memoirs and things like that, but it's been a minority view, and it has a history. Now that's something that I can write in my sleep. I gave a little talk. I was invited to the Sorbonne, which is where I also gave some of these early chapters, by the History of Economics group. They look at me and they see a historian of economics, okay, a historian of monetary economics, and which is true. They don't see, a money view person. So I gave them the money view lectures too, and they were kind of astonished by that. Oh, you're taking a history of thought approach to monetary economics. Like, well, actually, it's kind of the reverse. I used the history of I chose ancestors essentially. Minsky, Kindleberger, etc., and Hawtrey and Keynes and all of that. In order to try to build in that tradition. So I figure I should turn that into a final chapter, chapter 9, reaching out to the historians of money view thought. um, so that's the book, and you can see that I'm sort of working on all parts of it at the same time, which is also very different from my other books. My other books, because they're chronologies, I write them in order. Chapter 1 comes, then chapter 2, and I don't work on the whole book at a time, because I don't want to prejudge. I want the book to unfold. I don't want to, decide, and here are the famous articles. Where did they come from? And read the past through that. I want to do the reverse. I want to understand the juvenilia and all of that. So that's why the other books read the way they do. This one is different. So that's my update on the money view for present times. Um, Now I just want to do the recap, unless somebody has some reaction to that, because we're now shifting gears. But you can also, if you remember, you have a question or a thought, you can come back later and we can chat. Okay.
I mean,
The
honestly, just interjecting here, how are
Okay.
you working on all chapters at the same time? Just like how is the process working? And I don't.
Oh, it's not that I'm not, it's I'm that's not exactly right. What I mean is that I'm thinking about the whole project, and I have done, when somebody invites me to speak or something, I say, okay, I will say yes, because I see that the topic that you want me to talk about is one of my chapters. Okay. So
Okay.
let me now, push that forward, or use this opportunity to give a rough draft of that chapter, create a PowerPoint rather than a chapter. Or so that's what I mean. Whereas in general, when I write my books, I'm really quite rigorously going through the chronology, and I don't give talks on them until they're done and published. So this is much more of a engage. I'm trying to think about, who is this chapter being written for? And let me learn about them. Let me go talk to them, so that I hear what they're interested in, and I can better engage them. It's actually the kind of thing that I realized happens, when, like, when Yaki and I and Dan wrote that stablecoin paper, that my friend Bob McCauley seems to be interpreting as a defense of crypto, whereas in fact it was the reverse. If we had given that paper to him, but we could have just added a few little sentences there, in order to avoid that misinterpretation. So that's what I'm trying to do a little bit here, is like to make I'm very aware that the money view, people come to it from a particular place in their own lives that I don't know anything about. And so I need to become sensitized to what are they seeing, and the only way to do that is to talk to them and to hear what they're interested in. I just gave a talk to a bunch of philosophers, as a matter of fact, who asked me to come and talk. They have a little working group. I put that in the chat at various points. So a lot of people are interested in money. That seems to be what's happening. There's a lot of different angles, and I feel that I want this book to be useful to them. So I need to learn a little bit about them. Once I have chapters 1 through 5, that will be just sort of my statement. Like here, that's the money view right there from my point of view. And now I can reach out and learn other literatures. I'm on sabbatical next year, supposing that Boston University survives. You may have heard Quinn speak about this. And so I have time to actually do this, and that's what I'm going to be doing. Maybe since I've mentioned Quinn, what's happening to the universities in the United States from Trump, okay, is destroying their business model, completely destroying their business model. And so now we will find out, when they have to do cuts, what are they going to cut? Are they going to cut administrative bloat, which of course all professors want them to do, or are they going to, in fact, cut professors and departments, and things like that? And so this is going to be a huge fight. And I'm very happy that I'm going to be on sabbatical during most of it. So I can just write my book. And then I will find out if there's a university left to come back to. And if not, then I won't come back to it. And that'll be that, So
and we will do like Axel Leonhufvud's when he had to go on early retirement from University of California. We will find some European university where you will have a summer school every year.
Yes, or more, even a fall school. So I'm not that old. I'm not that old. All right. So, but anyway, so this is part of my, prevent Mr. Trump from living free in my brain by I'm not even going to pay attention to this. I'm writing my treatise on money, and all this chaos in the world is going to happen. And it doesn't affect me because I can write this book without anyone's help, and I don't have any grants that are going to be canceled. And so I can just hold myself up and write the book. And so that's the plan. Are some of these chat things, I haven't been following this, are these, you're talking to each other or you want me to respond to these things?
Someone was asking if there was a chapter on global money, and I said, well, maybe the whole book is about global
yeah,
money.
so let me just say that. Let me say that. That's very important. I'm glad you chimed in. So one of the differences between the MOOC and this book, okay, is that the global stuff is there in chapter 1, okay? Not only that, the capital market stuff is there in chapter 1, okay? So that it is a global shadow banking dollar system, in chapter 1, okay? And that's how it works, and all the way through. So it's quite different from the MOOC in that way. And I should say that maybe you remember you've all done the MOOC. The MOOC, I was to establish relevance in the MOOC. I started every lecture with an FT article, okay, and I couldn't figure out. Well, I can't really do that. I don't want to date myself, in the book here. So what I have, for those of you who've seen the chapters, what I have is every 3 or 4 pages, I have a little box, okay, that is an application of the ideas that have been developed so far to some current problem or even historical problem. So there's a box on what exactly is an SDR, or a box on, so they're different little boxes to make it clear that the sort of high level analytical conversation has immediate implications for something that you care about. So that's how I'm writing it. And that also makes it more modular so that I can add these boxes and move them around. The text is very linear. It's very pedagogical. It's building from fundamental principles, and then you build on those, and you build on those. You're not going to be able to just read one of these chapters. You're going to have to start from the beginning, in order to see it building up. Unless you already know the money view, in which case you can just jump to whichever chapter you care about. But it's very much intended to be something that a graduate student could pick up and read from the beginning to the end, and read a second time and read a third time, like Alex, like you're doing with the MOOC, okay? Except that's 12 years old, the MOOC, and so you've kept it alive, but I hope that this doesn't cannibalize the market for the MOOC, and it's a book, and it will be so it will be different. Okay, it'll be different than the MOOC, and maybe I'll make a MOOC out of this, after it's done. But at the moment, I'm writing it as a book. I'm not trying to think of it as a proto MOOC. And any other comments, or questions about this? Or
I was just going to say that I don't like the boxes. I want it to all be integrated.
yeah, well, it's kind of integrated, but they are there. This came from. Have I shown you some of these chapters, Alex? I have.
Yeah,
and
you sent them to
like
me.
them. You don't like them. Okay.
Yeah. Well, no,
So
I like them. I just have this criticism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll figure out.
I like the
some of the
MOOC.
stuff I do integrate. For example, war finance. Okay.
Yeah.
Is very much in the chapter when I'm trying to introduce the state, that it is very, very helpful to say, how exactly did World War II get financed? How did that work? That's an episode of global finance, by the United States financial system. And so that's my example. Instead of Civil War finance, which is lecture two, right? Or lecture 3 in the MOOC is Civil War finance. So I some things are integrated in the text, okay, and some things are boxes. I did this basically on the advice of one of my graduate students who I said, how did you learn the money view? He said the examples, more and more examples. So I thought, okay, I'll put examples of using money view thinking for something, instead of and so that makes it more practical.
Well, I agree with that. And I would say that I learned through the examples too. And like that Civil War finance thing, like I'm never going to forget that, like Sam and Pete Chase sucked all the gold out of the banking system and all of that. But I think that means, for me at least, I want to see the examples not be relegated to boxes. I want them to be central.
Well, they're not relegated. They'll be in the text. They're not,
but
they're not appendices. They're not appendices.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they're like my image here a little bit was the way these BIS papers very often have little boxes in the middle of them. I think typically they put things in boxes that they think are maybe analytical roadblocks, that they might, if you put it in the text, somebody would stumble over them and stop reading. So they put hard stuff in boxes, and so that you can read the paper ignoring the boxes, and then once you understand it, you can go back and look at the boxes and try to figure them out. So I'm doing I think the boxes in general can be read on their own. They're not the difficult parts. The text itself is the difficult part. The examples are actually easier. So they're meant to give you kind of a relief, and they're like Pac-Man, a little something you could just gobble and then feel good. Oh, I understood something. That's great. So now I have the energy to go on and read 3 more pages of kind of analytical, where I have to look at every single word. Okay. And then I get another little reward, Pac-Man, and so I'm trying to use the dopamine circuit, but I'm not sure it works. I've heard your concerns, and it's
well, I like that. I like that idea of giving us something easy to kind of keep us motivated. I think if it's in a box, then it interrupts the flow, and we might skip it if it's in a box, the way we do with the BIS articles.
It's so tasty. It's so tasty.
So put it in the main below.
All right. Well, it's a writerly challenge, because the normal book that I write has a narrative flow that organizes everything. And this is an analytical flow. And so it's quite different. And so I am experiencing a writerly challenge. When I revise 1 through 5, I will keep this in mind and see if I can produce something. I think 6, 7, 8, 9, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. So, but the main chapters are 1 through 5, and possibly there'll be a 6th one, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we can discuss this.
Okay.
There are ways of doing. I mean, there could be. I think what is interesting about the attempt here is that there should be a timeless book if it's going to be something close akin to a treatise, and then the question is, how do you bring in contemporary things into the question, or examples that will still hold up. Maybe the way it's done with textbooks often is that you have the textbook, and then you have an exercise book to go with it, right? Something that you can update continuously, or that's used for teaching, or has a different purpose. So maybe these exercise sheets, or
you guys have said, Oscar particularly, you guys have said that you're going to create a companion volume that is an exercise book, and so I say go for it. These are not going to be exercises like that. The boxes are not like that. They show you examples of me explaining something to you using this language. But if you want to learn to do it yourself, okay, the boxes aren't going to be enough. You need more pedagogical instruction. I think that my comparative advantage is writing the treatise itself. Okay.
Yes.
And then somebody else can. I have problem sets in my classes and things like that, but they're so different from this book. They're, maybe I'll change my mind, but this is the way I'm thinking of it right now.
No, and I think Sasha and Sam have taken over the. I'm not teaching it anymore, so I gave up, but I've been driving the idea, so supporting it, and with the development in technology, this is a 10-year-old idea since when the MOOC was new, and when the book is out, then I see potentials of worksheets or exercises, both linked to the book and linked to the MOOC, and both on iPad, interactive, or additional boxes. So, but I want the boxes in there for the flow of the text and flow of the boxes, and then it's the third dimension to have a workbook exercise. Yeah. But anyway,
something like that. And or maybe there'll be a platform, which is sort of what Sasha was talking about, some interactive balance sheet, something or other. So this is it. Why is this not moving? There it is. So let me now talk about is that the first one? Yeah. So I was thinking about what Yakov said yesterday, about how that he said the money view has an agent problem. Okay, that the theory of agent behavior, okay, is not so much there, and also that the methodology is not that clear. I thought about that. In fact, I'll take the first one first. One of the things that I think he's responding to is that, to the extent that there's a theory of the agent, it's about it's that the agents are forced to do something because they're hitting a binding settlement constraint, and so you don't have to be modeling them very much, because it's a corner solution. And so they're not trading things off or something like that. The liquidity preference aspect of this, okay, is not about supply and demand for money. It's about lining up cash flows in time. And so just showing the breakdown of uncovered interest parity and things like that, sort of the price of liquidity is what. So that's the point, is that I'm really trying to do macroeconomics, right? And to talk about the behavior of the system, okay, not the behavior of individual agents, okay? But it's possible that you could bring in the behavior of individual agents in the following way, which I was talking about basically yesterday. If you think of the central bank, for example, as an individual agent, every central bank, every nation faces the problem of its interface with the larger system. And depending on where they are in the international hierarchy of money, that's a different problem. And they have different tools available to them. So there's an agent, the central bank and the government. And you could do this, you could push that down farther and say, every individual faces the problem of their interface with this larger system that has laws of motion and behavior that for you is exogenous, right? You need to what are the implications of this theory of money for agent behavior? That when you say lining up cash flows, and I think people are intuitively doing this, because they're forced to, by the system, but they may not realize that that's what they're doing. And certainly the economist's idea that the agent's problem, if you're a household, okay, is sort of, figuring out your lifetime wealth. It's a life cycle problem, is not lining up your cash inflows and outflows. It's distributing wealth over time. And so that will certainly, when you do a money view of orthodoxy, that can be talked about. Similarly, firms, that by focusing on the liquidity problem, and that came up in discussion here too, that banks only fail, the banks that are failed are all insolvent. Well, of course, once you hit a liquidity constraint and you have to do fire sale of your assets, you're insolvent. That's what it is. But if the solvency before this liquidation exercise is just an accounting exercise. And you could argue about it. You could say, if you just let me live another, 5 years, I will recapitalize myself, and I don't have to, you don't have to kill me, So this sort of, I think there are things that can be done to respond to Yakov's concern, but I know where it comes from. The reason it feels that way is because I'm more interested in the system dynamics, the dynamics of the system as a whole in macroeconomics. And so sometimes I kind of go a little light maybe on the microeconomics. And I think maybe that's something that can be fixed. Similarly, I do think, it's institutional research. So some people take the MOOC and they, like Anush Kapadi, in fact, said, you don't have a theory of money here. What this is a methodology. It's a balance sheet methodology that we could use for this, we could use for that. We could see Stefan using sort of balance sheet methodology and not really taking on board in that paper, which is an excellent paper, but you don't really see the survival constraint there. You don't really see the dealer system. You don't see the pieces that I put at the center of the money view. They will show up once you start to bring those balance sheets into contact with the system as a whole. But I think I could do more to. So some people see the money view only as a methodology, as a balance sheet methodology. And I've been and so I tried to back away from that, and to make clear in this text. Even Kevin Gallagher, who hired me at BU, said, "Oh, you're writing a book. I hope this time you'll actually not just describe the system, but have some theory." I said, "I thought I did that in the MOOC, but okay, some people don't see that, so I need to have a balance there." So I am. I thought those were helpful comment. So here's I guess this is still about the book, okay, and then I'll the what this conference shows, I think, too, is that the money view is a kind of open platform, that it's a kind of lingua franca that you can use to talk about multiple kinds of problems. And the primacy, what makes it distinct from other approaches is the primacy of the transaction. This came up in the discussion in the session with Quinn and Yakov, that the present causing the present, there are flows, there's settlement constraint, but there's also a stock issue, that there are lingering consequences of cash flow imbalances, which are these financial assets that have to be priced, and that liquidity preference enters there. This distinction between stocks and flows, between solvency and liquidity, between accounting myth and market reality. This little example here that I have in, I think, chapter 1 of the book, and I teach from it all the time. I just taught it in my class yesterday, about the timing of that you can. This is an example of three different ways of financing an initial cash outlay of 20 that gives you a cash inflow of 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. That you're in each case you're promising to pay back 20. but it really matters when you're paying it back. And so you can see the solvency versus liquidity very clearly here. And that example is one of the boxes actually in the book. So now I want to talk about some of these contributed papers in the conference. I want to talk about a little bit. I really liked the one about extending this concept of hierarchy to now hierarchy of banking institutions, and understanding, there's domestic banks, there's global banks, there's dollar banks, and understanding that there's a hierarchy that shows up in their cost of funding, actually, is what he's looking at here. And I think this is great. And this is his chart that he created, which is a hierarchy, although it's on its side, as was mentioned. But really, this is one of the things about that I really enjoyed about the conference this year, that I'm learning things now, things that I didn't know myself. People are pushing this way of thinking about the world, and so that may be a little bit of a problem, possibly, because it might be a conversation then that now is harder for newbies to enter, whereas 5 years ago, it was a lot of the emphasis was on making it possible for newbies to enter. So we may want to think about that in future conferences, that some of these papers are I love them, but they're going to be hard for somebody who's new to this, to see what the point is. The second paper, Ferry, with a history of thought paper, gets to the question. Some people say there's no money view of the monetary standard. Well, this discussion of Metallism and Chartalism is sort of where that is in the MOOC, and that's actually lectures 13 and 14 when we're doing international economics. I think that is much more in the. I think there is a money view of the monetary standard. So, but if there's an impression that there isn't one, that means that I need to write it down. Okay. But this was a fascinating paper because it's not just Metallism and Chartalism, it's also sort of private banking versus the state. It's international versus domestic. I remember the discussion of the money view reading group that you're about to read, Brodell. So Wheels of Commerce, which is where I started with all of this 35 years ago, really reading Wheels of Commerce and understanding how banking worked in the 16th century, and before the modern state, where there was a private money that was merchants' money, and it was international money. So it was a promise to pay gold, but it was a credit money. They were promises to pay. They were merchants' bills, so they're not actually using gold, they're using gold only in ultimate settlement. But there's a credit apparatus built on top of that, and by the merchants. Okay, and then there's domestic money, which doesn't travel at all because it's the king's money and it's crap. And so the new thing that Galliani, or this fellow I never heard of him before, seems to have done is to appreciate that the credit of Venice is good, and so you can build a chartalist money on top of public credit, and that is going to be an international money because Venice was sort of key currency, at that time. So that's a fascinating kind of paper. I wish we could have talked more about it. And the third one, I quote it from the slide. Social reality is inherently relational, that the money view sees society as a web of formal promises to pay. So they're not just relations, they're legally enforceable relations. Okay. And not only are they legally enforceable, they are enforced every day at the settlement. They're promises to pay, and either you can pay or you cannot pay. I really found this paper lovely because when I've tried to explain the money view to other social scientists, often they really find very uncomfortable. They want to know, like, well, where's the real social relation? Because they have in mind sort of capitalists and workers or something. And I have to say to them, this is a pretty social this is a social relation. A promise to pay is a social relation. It's just not one that you have built your social theory around before. But I think that's what I think we're doing. So I'm glad that came through very much. And the concern to sort of ontologically anchor this, I wanted to say that the philosophers are very interested in they notice this and they like it. So that's an audience that I never expected that I would be looking at the money view, but there you go. You write your books and people make their choices. So I want to get back to the Gandhi, if that's how you pronounce it, and just make a few last minute, 2 more slides here. In the very first chapter of the book, I use this image here, which is from the BIS, that's showing from 2002 to 2007 the buildup of global cross-border credit in the global banking system, which contracted somewhat, in the financial crisis that followed. So this image is the same as that image in a way. He's pointing out that these are gross flows, so they're going both directions. So these are banks that are taking deposits but also making loans across borders. And it was very interesting to me to hear that we should think of these flows as being really just 26 balance sheets, not the banking systems of these areas, but actually the few number of global banks, which the BIS knows their balance sheet, knows everything there is to know about their balance sheet. But this is proprietary information. We don't know their balance sheet, but the BIS does. And so what they're pointing out is the hierarchical character of this, that what we're seeing when we're looking at the relationship between Europe, Asia, and the US, those are the main flows, are just a very small fraction of the balance sheets of the global banking system. And then those feed down into local balance sheets and so forth in individual countries. So just make that link. And because they were talking too about the hierarchy, I just want to link what they're saying to my 2 hierarchies and emphasize here. This is also in chapter 2 of the book, chapter 1 of the book. Some of these are familiar to you, but I emphasize in the book, which I don't always do, that these are different kinds of hierarchies. Okay, that the hierarchy on the left, okay, is as they say, everyone pays in the IOUs of the entity that's above them in the hierarchy. So that deposits are money for me, but not for banks. Currency or liabilities of the central bank are reserves. Are money for banks, but not for central banks. And central banks have to have an international currency in which they. So everyone is paying in the liability of the layer above them. Okay, so that's the kind of payment hierarchy. But on the right, that's not true. There's an ultimate international dollar, and the hierarchy has to do with how tied in you are with that ultimate hierarchy. Are you in the global north? Do you have a liquidity swap line between your central banks? Okay, in which case you're in level 2. Okay, or do you merely have access to the repo facility at the Fed? Okay, in which case you're in level 3, the emerging market economies. Or are you kind of reliant on the good graces of the IMF? Then you're the bottom. So how tightly are you tied in to this global dollar system? So it's a different kind of hierarchy. You're not the layer above you in that hierarchy is not money for you. It's the dollar is money for you. It's a key currency system. It's the currency for everybody. And I think that's it is hierarchical. The international system is hierarchical, but and this came up also in Nina's comments about the dollar hegemony and so forth. It's a different kind of hierarchy than the hierarchy that we're building on before. So let me stop sharing and say if there's discussion about that or thoughts about that, I prompted by reacting to the conference as a whole.
So that hierarchy on the right is basically just a hierarchy of what level of access people have to the dollar, essentially.
Okay, access. I'll say yes. Okay, but I think of it more as what is the nature of your interface with the global dollar system? You know, what sorts of hooks do you have into that? And yeah.
So it's a hierarchy of how connected you are to the dollar
Yes,
system.
I think so. I think so. And yeah, a lot of it's about your level of financial development as well in domestically, you know, because you can't really hook into the global system unless you have pretty well developed financial markets domestically. So it's levels of it's stages of economic development that are showing up in a hierarchy of international money as well. And so there's a core periphery. It's a core periphery type thing. Then more than the left hand hierarchy is not a core periphery thing.
Can I add on that? I think because it was a very important point Jakov mentioned in the panel I shared yesterday. I think that with the example from Russia and the sanctions and the cutting of the international business banking system, the SWIFT, and then the comment from Macaulay that the opposite trade to the ruble has changed from dollar to renminbi. So this is something I'm pointing maybe for some students that are doing some research. This should be followed up on and researched more. I think that if the design of the sanction was made by those educated in the MOOC, and as Jakov mentioned, and then what's happening there now with as an example from this point of access to dollar
well, so he made the point that the sanctions did work very well in the short run because it takes a while for the institutional development, but you know, there's going to be an institutional response, you know, and remember that the RMB, you know, is actually tied into, you know, there's $3 trillion worth of dollar reserves there. Okay, so you're being tied into the RMB. Okay, is the RMB stable? You know, it basically pegged their exchange rate with the dollar. So there is a tie-in to the dollar system there that does not require you to go through any U.S. dominated, you know, clearing system or anything like that. But you're still part of the global settlement system, actually, you know, and China's happy to do that for you. And I would like to learn more about that. But that may all change. We'll see. It looks like the Ukraine war is over, and
and we have to pay for it.
Yes, the Europeans have to pay for it. By you mean Europeans.
Yeah, we in Europe. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. The United States has been paying for it so far, so now it's your turn.
Yeah, and then we are paying it by paying to you 4% of our GDP by buying some old war material.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We appreciate your help.
And we also delivering and subcontractors to your military industry.
Yeah.
So there's a tie in there.
Yeah. Either that or you get 100% tariffs, one or the other.
May I ask a question which is related to the value of money, which you say you address in one of your MOOC lessons, but do you consider the four prices of money as an approximation to the value of money?
An approximation.
Well, I mean, because you say you have par, you have par between exchange rates, you have interest rate par, blah, 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 etc. Is that sort of a empirical way of approaching something which is more immaterial, namely the value of money, which is a very it's a different concept to translate into something very, very concrete.
Well, but if what do you, it depends on what you mean by the value of money. Sometimes what people mean by the
What I
value of
mean by
money,
the value of money is
purchasing power.
Yeah, which simply is the purchasing power or the claims you can make on the product.
That's the theory. That's the fourth price of money that I call it always, which is the price level, and that I talked about last year. Okay, so there are that's when you have to talk about the value of money. And if in fact money is a promise to pay some outside thing, under a gold standard or something, then you have another little story in mind about that. But I do think that the gold standard it's over. We're not going to do that again. That unless if we do, it's because things have broken down. So the best thing to do is to try to make the present system work, and that's what I'm trying to do, is to reveal sort of how it does work. I realize that in the MOOC often the shifting between levels of abstraction I'm not always clear at all when I'm describing the system, and I say, if you look at it, it's hierarchical. Okay. And when I'm explaining the system, well, why is it hierarchical? Or why does it have the hierarchy it has? What are the economic underpinnings of that? And so I'm trying to be clearer about that, clearer even in my own mind about that. That a lot of the MOOC comes from, it's inductive. That's the approach, that you're using the balance sheets as a way to think about the system without imposing too much analytical structure on it. That you can at least start to map it, right? You can at least start to say, okay, there's a balance sheet, whose assets, whose liabilities. You can start to map it. And then as you notice patterns emerging, you can start to think, well, okay, that's an interesting pattern. Where does that come from? You can see that's sort of what Stefan was doing this afternoon. First map it, and then say, well, why is it that way? What is why, how does it change over time? What are the forces that are causing it to change over time? So that's essentially what I did in the MOOC, for the private part of the system, and for the payment part of the system, starting with payments and then moving to market making for financial assets, and bracketing, Karen, and bracketing the question of the value of money, bracketing the question of the purchasing power of money or inflation or something, because that seemed to me a very difficult problem. And so I wanted to solve easier problems first, and then try to use that apparatus to say something about the price level, which is what I did last year. And I haven't written it down in a paper yet, but I have reviewed the lecture that was recorded, and I think I would stand by it. So I'm not going to. I'm not saying wait for the paper. That's. I think it's okay. I think it's okay. Well, I'll find out when I try to write it into a paper. Probably there are some, unsubstantiated leaps of logic. That's what PowerPoints allow you to do. So and that's the whole point of them, right? That they help you map out kind of a direction without filling in all of the details yet.
I still don't think you get at the outside spread of the price level and like the monetary standard itself.
No, I don't. Yeah. I agree with that. That whole lecture is really that three level theory. The level one, you're never hitting the outside spread, and so I don't need to talk about it. And that's mostly what I talk about in that lecture. So the outside spread will be, I think, and the reason is because I think you do need a theory of production. You need macroeconomics. You need chapter 5, okay, in order to do chapter 4 properly, okay? And so that's why I didn't turn it into a paper, because I realized, like, to really do chapter 4 properly, you need a theory of the outside spread, and that's what a money view of macroeconomics is starting to get to there. And you can just think about that, the Leontief thing and so forth. You know, that's a story of that's moving more in that direction than I did last year. I say, if you may remember last year, I do say that the outside spread is sort of the producer on one side and the consumer on the other side. But what are producers? What are consumers? You know, it's not nailed down. I would still say that. You know, but the concept of production now is clearer, and the concept of consumption too, by using this classical trick of thinking of labor as being a produced good, you can start to close the circle. But it's not all worked out yet.
Yeah, I have to think about and look at the Leontief stuff, because that's all new to me.
But may I say something? Leontief to me is very, well, I mean, doesn't really allow for surplus production, surplus value production of some sort. So what is your attitude to that? Is more produced in value from one period to another, let's say, or is this exactly the same value product that comes out? If you consider labor as a produced product, which reproduces its own, what you say, salary, reproduction costs only, and nothing more than that, where does any surplus come from?
Well, but it's not just labor that's produced. There's everything else is produced too. And so I haven't mapped this. I haven't mapped this.
Reproducing itself. I mean, that's the same value that goes on.
Yeah, I haven't mapped this onto the more Marxian idea of surplus value yet. You know, but that's a fair question, and that is one of the reasons, just to note, you know, that a lot of the people who use the circuitist approach, you know, are motivated by MCM prime kind of images of the world, you know, and they see when Keynes says, oh, we need a monetary theory of production, they say, oh, we have a monetary theory of production. It's called Capital Volume 1, you know, and so they try to map that, they try to do a Marx-Keynes combo there, and that may be where this is going. I find the circuitist unsatisfactory because it's aggregates, you know, and it's also not flow, it's periods. It starts here and then it's reflux. It's not flow, you know, and in the money view, you settle every day, you know, so and if production takes a year, so now what? You gotta bring these two time scales into contact with each other. And in order to make that go. So that's what I'm trying to do anyway. But I'm aware of those traditions. Just as all of, you know, what Yakov was reminding me of. And in fact, we had some conversation after, maybe I even put it in the chat, that there are many roads from Keynes, you know, and some people try to add Marx to him. Some people tried to go the Walrasian route, you know, and that's where we are now, actually, in standard economics, you know. And I think for me, from a money view point of view, the most productive roads from Keynes, okay, are roads from the treatise, not from the general theory, you know, because he is specializing things for a particular moment in history, in 1936. And so that's why the state is where it is, and there's a lot of the detail about how the monetary system works is all in the treatise, 1930. And so all the people who worked with him in Cambridge are very much aware of the treatise, you know, and Harriet and many other people are building on the treatise, not on the general theory. And I would put Hicks in that category. Ultimately, I would put others. So that's sort of what I'm trying to think about that evolution, you know, in my mind, you know, those are my ancestors there, the people who built on the treatise, not so much on the general theory. But for modern times, and so there's more finance, lots more finance, and I see Armin.
Yep. so I want to jump into the Leontief, say, model. And well, I have issues with the Leontief style of thinking because I think it's basically an engineering mindset. You have a vector of input stuff and you have a matrix, and then you transformed it into a vector of output stuff. And basically, when I read about that, I think about stuff. But then what you actually have in there is monetary values. It's all in euros or dollars or whatever. And of course, you can measure stuff in dollar, but then you have all the issues of value change and inflation and profits and what have you. And the more I looked into the thing, the more dizzy I became. And I thought, okay, that's not my fault. It's somewhere in there that is not really properly well thought through. How did you encounter the whole issue?
Well, I'm not particularly building on Leontief, what Leontief himself did. Okay. And if you look at my little equations, okay, my A matrix, okay, is actually more of a technology. They're not monetary numbers, because I have a P matrix, okay, a price matrix that is separate, and so those prices are multiplying quantities. So what I'm getting from Leontief is this notion that we can think of production as a transformation of a vector of inputs. I'm trying to decentralize things, right? So and have linear production, so that you're not having a production function, solo growth models, stuff like that. And then I'm also adding time. So I'm doing it in quantities, and I'm also separating. What Leontief was looking for, and it was actually kind of inspired, I think, a little bit by Marx, maybe, is sort of he was looking for a kind of steady state where what's happening every period is that this input matrix is scaling up by 5%, every year. And that's what growth is, okay, is scaling up this, or I mean, as Yakov said, I don't know whether he said this in the chat or to me personally, he's looking for the eigenvectors and eigenvalues of this matrix, with the idea that that's what growth is. Growth is the eigenvalue of this matrix. And I'm not caring about that. We're many of you people, we're caring about settlement, right now, and we're thinking about disequilibrium too. So that it doesn't have to be steady state growth at the at that eigenvalue. So this is math that maybe not everybody here knows, but I did a period in my life so I know all of linear algebra, and so I think I can probably do this math. I'll go back to it, and I have some early papers that were all serious linear algebra stuff. So I can when I was trying to think about money, originally, probably nobody here has read that paper, but I was thinking about production, and that firms have a borrowing constraint, and then what's going to happen as they face random fluctuations in demand is that some of them will become net borrowers, some of them will become net lenders, and then there's an interest rate so I have a little model of that and I think that I can go back to that and revive that. It was a simulation model, actually, so you couldn't solve it, because it actually had n producers in it, and so it was, and the equilibrium concept was a distribution of debt and I had exogenous shocks and things like that. So I think this. I'm not particularly employing all the Leontief structure, except for like production, thinking about it as a way of getting differentiated production. I am a little worried about things like services, which Leontief, as you say, it's stuff, as you say, it's stuff. And so I haven't, he's not thinking about a service economy. he's thinking about a war economy. We know how many tanks we need. How much steel do we need? So that's sort of the frame, and that was also the frame for the Russian government. We're doing planning and stuff like that. We need to industrialize. Where are the bottlenecks? What do we need to be doing in order to build a modern economy? And so that kind of thinking, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm saying you have a modern economy, okay? And it has these global supply chains that are in different places, and we need to, but there is a pattern to it. There's a productive pattern to it that we can probably, for a moment, characterize as this matrix that is linking inputs in one period to outputs in another period. And let's start with that, because, well, frankly, because that lets us use linear algebra, which is great. It's the right tool, I think, for decentralizing. So we're not aggregating things up. We're able to handle a very, very large vector. Because from linear algebra point of view, 2 by 2, it's the same as n by n. It's the same math. So you can specialize it for 3 sectors, to show a worked example, but you can see that you could do it for n by n once you show that example. That's the idea.
I would say that the problem that we have nowadays that would be worth modeling is the conflict between more and more, relatively speaking, more and more fixed capital to floating capital, circulating capital, raw material, where with the big energy system, for example, we have very little running cost compared to the capital cost. So I would say that the distinction that's very essential is between fixed capital and circulating capital. And not
That's
so much about,
that's a very important point. That's a very important point.
not so much about the things that are being produced as such within each of the
because
categories.
I am stuck in the classical view, which is sort of everything is circulating capital, and so I think bringing on board fixed capital, it may be important. That it's clear that I am not thinking about fixed capital, and because and it works. The classical model works. So bringing in machinery was a problem for them, and so bringing in machinery is going to be a problem for me too, and I have to figure out what to do about that. And that's true. I guess I was worrying about services, right? Which is the opposite end of the problem. Like that this is something where there's a flow and no stock. You can't have an inventory of services. So that an inventory of services is just underutilized inputs, where it's that the people who are doing your nails are sitting around doing nothing, waiting for customers. That's how services work. Or the restaurant is empty, and so services are and I was thinking that the modern economy, as opposed to Leontief, is a much more service economy, and so that it is important to figure out how to handle that. And unemployed labor seemed like maybe a way, but you're pointing out that the modern economy, or maybe the one to come, is maybe also a fixed capital economy. So these are things. I probably will try to solve the problem with circulating capital first, and then see if we can add other things in. This is usual strategy for solving hard problems. Solve an easy problem first, okay, and then don't try to solve the hard one. Wait until you can solve easy one, and then add. Yes, Armin, you have suggestions for how to solve them? Yeah.
Well, just what comes to my mind when I listen to you. So possibly we are bifurcating in a way. On the one hand, we are losing industry and going for a service society. So this means less fixed capital. But on the other hand, we want to have an energy transition and a green transition with all renewable energy, which are very capital intensive. So, and I thought in a way it's a bifurcation into the two extremes. However, with one caveat, yes, service is also, most of the service is not done outdoor, but indoor. And so even the restaurant owner needs to pay rent. And if you are in a fancy neighborhood, the rent is very high.
Yeah. Well, Cecilia was making this distinction between tangibles and intangibles too, and so and emphasizing phase one, phase two, that the goal of our overlords, has used to be, controlling intangibles. Now it's controlling tangibles as well. And so I think that maybe comes in too. Usually tangibles, are easier to finance because you can use them as collateral, whereas intangibles are really hard to finance. So they're and just like human capital accumulation, she was mentioning, I think, or Nina was mentioning student loans, that the way we essentially finance human capital is either the government subsidizes it, or the parents subsidize it, and mortgages are they're collateralized human capital loans because the house is collateral, but what is actually going to pay back this loan, okay, is not the housing services, okay, it's the wages of the people living in the house. So really, this is capitalized human capital is what a mortgage is. So, and the mortgage, I think, this is, I mentioned this in the talk, that we have to have mortgages in this picture, because it's such an important financial asset in all modern economies. It's a third of all debt, So just thinking, as the Socrates do, they think about a world in which all debt is business debt, that the firms are borrowing in order to buy the labor and so forth. Like, this isn't going to fly. We need to have government debt, we need to have household debt, or you're not really going to have a story of the modern economy. And so that's why I say possibly it won't be 5 chapters. There might be a 6th one.
So what is the 6th
Or,
one?
Well, when the content of a chapter gets beyond 30 pages, I break it into 2 chapters.
Okay.
That's the way I've always written my books. You may notice that the chapters are never longer than 30 pages. Never. That, and I think that it's for readability, but it also is for me a kind of a discipline. Like if it's getting to 45 pages, then you should think some more about why is it getting, that you want to have a theme for each chapter, and maybe you have too many themes here, and let's like break it into two separate things, and then it's 2 separate chapters. And that's usually what happens, that my chapter outline says this book will be 7 chapters, and then when it's actually published, it's 10 chapters. It's still the same outline. It's just, it turned out that I needed more time to do. That was the way with the Kindleberger book. I kind of thought that there would be 1 chapter that would get him through from birth to Columbia, and that was not true. There was 2 chapters for that, and I thought there would be 1 chapter that would be depression and war, but it's 2 chapters. So those things split off. Then after I got going, it really did kind of go the way I planned it to be, and 2 MIT chapters, 3 post MIT chapters. So there. So I'm prepared to let it, to let the book go where it needs to go, and I want to not make it so mathematical. So that may have to be a separate paper that I write, okay, and then not in the book, or a mathematical appendix or something like that. Because I don't want the average reader to have to know linear algebra, in order to read the book. But I think probably you need linear algebra to write the book. So that's what I'm going to be doing. The great thing about linear algebra, you need math that doesn't require equilibrium. This is the point, that you're not closing the model with equilibrium. You're closing it in other ways. And that you can do. You can create a dynamical system that has its own laws of motion, that doesn't rely on equilibrium concepts. Shangbei, yes.
Thank you. I actually have a question. I'm not sure it's fitting the part of the book or just broadly about how many of you relate with it. So the question is, I noticed, of course, probably many people notice rapid growth of private credit business in the States. So private credit really, I'm just wondering, have you given thought into how the private credit system, how that growth play into the money view framework, and also in terms of credit expansion, monetary growth, and the hierarchy of the money system, and also because they probably have different accounting system involved in that. And have you given thought into it? Of course, I also, even though despite the QT that is still ongoing, we have pretty strong monetary growth. I mean, starting from I would say sometime 23, right? How private credit may have played a role in that too?
Well, I was just talking with my class about this just last week, because the Boston Fed has just done a little study pointing out how private credit, and in general, the non-bank financial intermediary section, apparently has $2.2 trillion worth of credit commitments from the traditional banking system. So they are using these sort of lines of credit as their source of emergency liquidity, and that worries the Fed, because if you triggered that 2.2 trillion all at once, the Fed is gonna have to backstop it in somewhere with it. I think the growth of private credit, as many of the non-bank financial intermediaries, is partly driven by the regulatory rules, of Dodd-Frank, that the Volcker rule, for example, moved the dealer system into the hedge funds, or at least not the matched book dealer system. The matched book part of the dealer system stayed with the banks, but the speculative book part moved into the hedge funds and other institutions like that. And I think probably similarly, it's the case that Basel regulations, risk-weighted this and that, has moved certain kinds of credit into private credit, as you say, so that these are not deposit funded, they're funded through other mechanisms. So this might just be, regulation that's driving this. It's driving it into the shadows, that's a lot of the problem. I think globalization, of the supply chain and all of that, I think is the reason for shadow banking, and for that private equity, private credit, shadow banking. This is more than half of all credit that exists in the world now. So I emphasize this in all my classes, that if you're not thinking, if you're trying to think about traditional banking, deposits and loans, okay, you're not going to understand the modern system. You should start with shadow banking. You really should start. That's the marginal source of credit. This is the credit that travels globally, and so you should start as we did in our paper on shadow banking. Imagine a world that's only shadow banking, and I think you will, in general, get the right answer. Even though it's not only shadow banking, because I think that's where the prices are coming from. That that traditional banking is inframarginal now, and so the cutting edge of the system is that. So I don't have any regulatory responsibility, so I can just sort of think about it and write down what seems like a reasonable way of thinking about the system. But people at the Boston Fed have to always be looking for the next source of crisis, and I think they're kind of right that the non-bank financial intermediary system, they're not interested in holding large reserves of deposits. The stablecoin system, we heard before, how USDT had $500 million at Silicon Valley Bank, and so they were having owned reserves, but if you're a hedge fund, you don't want to have owned reserves. You want to have a line of credit, for which you're paying 0.5% or I don't know what, for an unused line of credit. And that's the kind of reserve that you need. And so to understand the dynamics of the system in a crisis, that's going to turn out to be important. That these are not, that article in the Fed, it was actually it was in the FT, it was in Alphaville, and it was Robin Wigglesworth had a little article there, and it was illustrated. I don't know if anyone noticed this. It was illustrated by a painting of Gustav Klimt, The Kiss. Yes, so I think it was a Valentine's Day joke a little bit, and it was the kiss between the shadow banking system and the traditional banking system, that they actually are completely intertwined, is what he was trying to say. But it was amusing to me because it was a Valentine's Day sort of joke in FT Alphaville. And so that's a good teachable moment when you can have the students read an article that operates at an emotional level, and it's not just about shadow banking, dry shadow banking. And
so if that line of credit can be drawn, of course, that can immediately trigger what appeared to be like February 2020 type of liquidity event.
Yes.
So basically, the cascading effect of that will basically say the liquidity is not enough. Of course, you just whole damn thing will just collapse until we do QE again.
Exactly. So yes, you're exactly right. That I'll just fill this in for other people. So he's talking about the COVID crisis, and what happened was these were corporations actually which had lines of credit with the banking system, and they all immediately went to the bank and said, that $1 million line of credit that I've been paying for the last couple of years, I would like to draw it down to zero right now. Okay, so open me a deposit account for $1 million, please. Okay, and the fact that all the corporations went and asked for that at the same time, okay, meant that suddenly the bank balance sheet is blowing up, and so they are responding by cutting other kinds of credit, and also liquidating things, treasury bills and so forth. So this was a big disruption, okay, and that is one of the reasons that the Fed, backstopped corporate credit, so in that it extended some of the liquidity backstops to the corporate bond ETFs and things like that. So yes, that could happen again. And these are, if you're talking about private credit, these are people who are even more hot money than corporations. They move very fast, and so.
So 2008, we got an event which is a kind of intertwined like a housing market issue, and also this exotic securities and CDU, whatever, CDU Square, all the things, right? But of course, 2020, we got this COVID event, which of course caused everybody to hoard cash. Of course, the money is not sufficient to really, of course, which caused the market to crash. Those two events, we can kind of identify the root cause for that. But coming back to this precautionary note we just talked about, what could that be? What could be that trigger?
I don't know. You're a trader, not me. I don't know. I guess it would be a matter of who's getting this private credit. I think usually they're subprime in some way or other, corporate borrowers, and they're so that they're paying a nice hefty credit premium, their default premium on that, and the way these private credit operations are funding themselves is through with pension funds, with institutional money. So that's the service they're selling. They're saying, you pension fund, you're reaching for yield. I will you give your money to me and I'll put it in a diversified portfolio of private credit. And that's the business model that you're talking about. So you ask yourself, what would cause that kind of relationship to blow up? What would cause, I imagine that these private credit funds with the pension funds, they probably have lockups, so that you can't pull your investment, in anytime you want. And but there's some agreement about something, there's some reason that they need these credit lines somewhere. Okay. Maybe they have these credit lines with the idea like there might be a great opportunity. Like I wanna, there's some crisis and instead of liquidating my portfolio, which I can't do, I want to be a buyer. When the blood is in the streets, I want to be a buyer, but that means I have to have a source of funds. Okay. And so a credit line could be like that, that you could be a buyer of credit at a time when the market is very soft. Before you can, make arrangements with the pension funds to fund it, that you want to be able to move fast and then go and say, okay, I've just accumulated all these extra assets here, and don't you want to double down with me? Or so I don't know enough about the business model to know why they need that liquidity and when they might trigger it. I've just noticed really for the first time last week that there is a $2.2 trillion loan commitment that the Fed has become aware of, the Boston Fed has become aware of. And so that's a big enough number to get my attention.
Thank you.
But that's lender of last resort stuff. And I think we understand that pretty well, as a matter of fact, so that this is not the hard problems of money view, which are the as I say, money view of macroeconomics is a hard problem. And lender of last resort, not so much. Are we running out of steam here? Yes, we're well into the liquidity hour. Where's the liquidity? You're all in Europe.
I don't know. We never officially started it, did we?
I just noticed in the chat somebody's talking about the liquidity happy hour.
Okay, let's make it official.
We're down to 20 now.
Let's make it official and stop the recording. Thanks, everybody.